Hello, I'm Matthew Stepanek.
And I'm Rayanne Haynes.
And this is Let's Get Lit. In every episode, we interview poets of stature about their work and about the power and relevancy of poetry in order to support it and promote the arts and literacy. In a conversational style, we'll enjoy a glass of wine chosen to match the poet's personality and style, while learning more about each poet and asking why poetry matters to them. Hopefully we'll be able to maintain our composure as we move closer to some form of bacchanal truth. We would like to acknowledge and celebrate that our interview takes place on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Pappas Chase, Nakota Sioux, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community.
Mm-hmm. And we'd also like to thank wine expert Gurvinder Bhatia for his generosity as the podcast wine sponsor. Our pairings come from Gurvinder's private cellar.
Let's Get Lit is presented with the Writers Guild of Alberta, and we're grateful for their support in promoting and sharing this podcast. And as you're listening, feel free to share your thoughts on the conversation with us on Twitter at @lets_lit. So tonight, whenever you're listening to this, maybe that's the time that matters more, we're pleased to welcome Claire Kelly to the podcast.
Yay.
She lives and writes on Treaty 6 in Edmonton and has written 2 full-length poetry collections, and you probably have a third one.
Nearing.
Or fourth, but yeah. Third one in the bank. So,
prolific.
yeah, lots coming from her.
Easily bored.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. So your first collection, Maunder, centers on the act of walking and is available from Palimpsest Press. One Thing Then Another, her second collection, which we'll be discussing in this episode, was released in April 2018 with ECW Press and looks at the disjointedness of cross-country relocation.
Cool.
And also her chapbook, Another Final Girl, is forthcoming from Rahilla's Ghost Press in spring 2020 and looks at the tropes of horror films through a feminist lens.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I guess we'll also get a sneak peek of that. So
Yeah.
that's a reason to listen to the whole podcast.
Yeah, don't quit halfway.
Yeah. We'll try to make Claire as
That's
entertaining as possible.
And if you're listening to it at night, it's for the late at night horror fans.
Yeah, we should recommend that. Listen to this late at night.
Okay.
You have a long bio, but there's a few more things I want to say. Claire's work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in Grain, QWERTY, The Antigonish Review, Prairie Fire, and Vallum. In 2017, her poem Mother, What Should We Do Now, was longlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize, and she is one of the organizers of the Olive Reading Series, which happens every second Wednesday at the Almanac.
From September till April.
From September till April. So there'll be chances to still get that for the next couple months.
Yeah.
You just missed the last one. Next one's December 11th, 7 p.m. at the Almanac. Yep.
Ooh.
That'll be out.
Very
by
cool.
Then. This will be out.
This will be out by then, yeah. So, Claire, I get to talk a little bit about your wine, and I knew... Take a sip. So, we knew that we needed to pick a unique, weird, and wondrous wine for you. Nothing ordinary, nothing plain, and hopefully nothing expected, like your poetry and your personality. So tonight...
That's a lot to live up to.
It's great!
So tonight we are drinking OMG from Blasted Church Winery in the Okanagan Valley. The bottle, people can't see it, but the bottle is super cool. It's kind of like... what did you say earlier about...
It's psychedelic lapsed Catholic.
Psychedelic lapsed Catholic on the label. And the cork was actually like a beer cap kind of cork. It was really... As soon as I saw this bottle and thinking of you, I was like, this has to be for Claire. So the winery is, I think, even cooler than the bottle. And the information on the website reads, in 2002, God herself took over a well-established yet unproven vineyard in Okanagan Falls, BC. The story focuses on local folklore, the blasting of a local church with dynamite in order to move it from point A to point B. Perfect for you. And lately,
Not just the blowing up of churches.
and then it says
We're not
lately
allowed to
there's
talk about that.
lately there's been a renaissance of where the gods have emerged from the church paintings and are touring the modern West Coast. We have lost control. These old souls do as they will. So I truly feel like we couldn't have found a better description of a winery for you. The wine description is equally fantastic. It says, on the 8th day, pop, fizz, clink. The wine pairs best with celebrations, birthdays, promotions, New Year's, and Wednesday nights. Yeah, right?
I was just trying to think of what day it was.
It's Friday. We should be doing this on a Wednesday. But so the wine itself is a white wine. It's a mixture of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Blanc. And it has notes of apple, pear, and almond with a shimmering, nutty, bright finish. So I believe that your sharp, unlimited imagery is the perfect companion for this wine. And I can't wait for everyone to hear your readings, which are equally unlimited in style and presentation.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I was saying the description of the church moving reminded me of the time the mayor of my hometown got in a feud with the priest of because I went to Catholic school.
Really?
Because over stained glass windows, and it ended with the priest ringing the bells at the new church at 2 a.m. and getting noise citations.
Really?
Oh yeah, and it was written up in the paper. It was one of my favorite newspaper articles ever because I didn't like the mayor or the priest, so it was just.
I was laughing. I was laughing. I was like,
that's
"Jeez."
his laugh.
Jeez. That was startling.
You startled her.
I thought you said Jesus.
Jesus. He knows, and we can't continue this conversation anymore.
All right. Well, that's cool. So we did. We picked well.
Claire, how are you?
Okay.
Tell us about your day, or maybe tell people what happened a half hour ago.
Oh, that's not even nice. You're being subversive nice.
This is great. How are
No, it's my usual life.
To the people. Yeah.
I can bring it into my poetry too.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got very lost. I don't make pictures in my head. I forget the scientific. There's a term for it. It's quite new. Quite a lot of the population doesn't actually visually access their visual memories or visual anything. And so I get lost a lot. And that's why I didn't know this at the time that I had that.
Yeah.
But when I moved to Fredericton from my hometown of Ajax, Ontario, I knew I was going to get lost a lot. So I decided to write a book about walking in the new place to learn how not to be lost all the time in that new place.
And that's Maunder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got lost, and after walking around a roundabout that was under construction for a while,
Yeah.
I waved down a very nice woman who had just moved to Edmonton a month ago, and she allowed me to call Rayanne, and luckily I'd written your phone number down. I don't have a cell phone as well. I like to live dangerously.
You do. Yeah.
But yeah, so I got lost, but it was okay.
We found
I'm
you.
used to it. It's a regular part of my life is getting lost.
So it's kind of like an adventure. You get to go on adventures.
My mom gets lost a lot too, and that's what she would say.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not lost, we're going on an adventure.
Yeah. I know I use that line with my children when I'm lost somewhere.
You should have had your mom on.
Oh,
moms.
for sure.
Okay, well, next time she comes on, we'll have her read some of your poetry.
Okay.
Unless your mom's a private poet. Or a public poet?
No, she did write when she was younger. One of the first short stories I ever wrote was I found one of her short stories and I put it I took her 1.5 page short story and made it 10 pages sort of thing.
Yeah.
Huh.
Cool. Short stories. What are you reading right now?
Ooh, I made a list.
Okay.
Sorry, you're gonna hear my paper move for a bit. I've been reading a lot of comic books. So for my birthday this year, I went back home to Ajax and had my mom paid for my comic book collection to get shipped back to Edmonton. So I got all my X-Men's, and I've basically been looking at the Chris Claremont run. So he was a very significant. If you're thinking of X-Men, you're probably thinking of Chris Claremont's X-Men.
Okay.
If you're around our age. And, I've been reading a lot of those. I started buying comics again. I've been reading a lot of horror. because I'm also
Right.
working on a horror novel, so I'm trying to remember how to write fiction and try to scare people. So I just finished a really good book, Grief Cottage by Gail Godwin, and it's not... it's one of those, like, about once every 2 years I find a book where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to read all this person's books. And it was one of those, like I've had it happen, Miriam Taves, first time I read Flying Troutman, I was like, I'm in. I still haven't read A Complicated Kindness, though, because
I have it on my bookshelf.
And I've read all her other ones, though.
Why haven't you read A Complicated Kindness? Because
I'll save it for I'll save it. I'm waiting for the perfect time.
Right.
And then occasionally I'm like, oh, I'm going to be hit by a bus. And then I'll like be lying on the pavement and be thinking, oh, I didn't read A Complicated Kindness.
Read it.
Ali Smith was another one.
Oh, yeah.
Scottish writer. She lives in England. And I am almost certain she has ADHD. I find...
Like the way she writes?
Yeah, and because I have ADHD,
Yeah.
The leap she takes, and I've heard her talk in interviews, she talks really quickly and hops subjects, which, I'm kindred, like, she's changed my writing a lot.
Okay, I'm going to check her out.
And then, I've been listening to audiobooks, like Ghost Road Blues. That was another ghost one. I'm reading, we have a Stephen King book club.
Yes, I heard about this.
You're in it.
Well, I heard about it.
We invited you. We haven't planned our first meeting
I
yet.
can't be in something that I haven't been, gone to yet.
Matthew will be a part of the inaugural Stephen King
Oh, it hasn't
club.
even started?
No!
Oh, okay.
But you're reading a book in preparation for
The
it?
Dead Zone.
Oh.
Right, I was supposed to start reading that.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down.
And I've just started The Changeling by Victor Laval. My problem sometimes with horror is finding... it can be a bit sausage party.
Yeah. You know what? When I was in Toronto last month for a book tour, and I went to the Toronto Art Gallery, and on the top, on the main exhibit on the top floor was a history of horror in film. That was their exhibit. And I paid the extra fee
I would have paid.
just to go see that one exhibit.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. It was at the museum, not the art gallery.
So the ROM?
So it was weird. Yeah, it was at the ROM. And I was like, why are they doing a horror exhibit at the ROM? So I paid extra to go see it. And it was so great. But actually a huge thing that was pointed out is how, like, male sausage party it was.
It's
and, like,
real
all
penis-y.
the penis-y, and all the posters
People
are,
getting
like,
their
the women
penises
in the
cut
big
off.
boobs showing. And,
Yeah.
and then, but it was really cool. You would have loved it.
I would have loved
Yeah.
it. I'm mad I wasn't there for it. And I just finished a poetry collection, so I have 3 that I'm carrying around, and I'm gonna hop into one real soon. Nolan Natasha, I Can Hear You, Can You Hear Me?
Okay.
Or Dominique Bouchard's One Dog Town. Oh, and I just got in the mail Isabella Wang's chapbook on Forgetting a Language. So I'm
nice.
just carrying it
Okay.
around right
A few
now.
that I want to get to. Well, I mean, you would recommend the Nolan Natasha to me, so that's...
Yes.
I want to get on that.
2 of them were at Poetry Weekend in Fredericton.
Okay.
When I was
When
back.
you were there?
Yeah.
Cool. It's a good list.
Well, I knew you guys were going to ask, so I wrote it down.
How did you know? I didn't tell you in advance.
We ask it a lot.
We
You
do
ask
ask
it.
it. She's heard our podcast before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did some research.
Who are these people that I already know?
Okay. Should we ask Claire to read a poem? Matthew's busy drinking
I'm
his
not.
wine.
I was trying to take a sip, and you're like asking me a question. I'm
He
like,
was undecided.
Yeah, I was undecided. As long as I can drink, Claire can read.
Okay. So we both love avoiding East Coast nostalgia out west, and we thought it would be a great poem to introduce your poetry part of the podcast. So when you're ready.
This is actually the first poem I wrote in Edmonton when I moved.
Cool.
It has an epigraph by Jessica Heimstra from her book Apologetic for Joy. I'm learning the eddies, the tug of my new city, new magpies. Avoiding East Coast nostalgia out west. So I'd forgotten the sound of birds, bingo lady magpies griping because their squares are bare, pigeons landing like bad apologies on the balcony above mine. I imagine delicate coos while they angle their heads, dun-colored sociopaths, all Hannibal Lecter cocking an ear for hot pot offal of oil patchworker, wheat farmer sirloin and semi-demi-glace. And the sun for days and days, such persistence, curtain tattooing the bedspread with laced shadow. No spring storm coming in, no nor'easter to bend the branches to litter sidewalks with tree buds. Readjustment be damned. Don't let me miss mist rain that can't be stopped by slicker or umbrella. Or the busker calling out, poem for a penny, who threatens when declined, fuck you, you scarf-wearing bitch. But the birds each morning keep singing with nothing yet to be done. So every day I cozy up to the balcony as I Wi-Fi my resume for jobs that actually pay. And practice my "you can trust me" smile, secretly wiping nerve-sweat palms along my good dress pants before gripping. And I practice my song for student loan repayment, my not-so-soft landing, feathered, somehow new.
I love that poem. I heard you read that poem, I'm sure, before at the Poetry Festival. I'm sure that I heard you read it there, and I loved it then. It's a great poem. And it takes so many fun twists, right? Like the poem guy, the poem on the street guy.
That's a real guy in Fredericton.
It's a real guy, and then he yells at you, and he swears at you, which you wouldn't expect from the poem guy.
It was the last walk I took in Fredericton with a friend.
Oh.
And he would,
that was a great goodbye walk for you.
And yeah, there is a thing about nostalgia for places you used to live where temperamentally you may only remember the good or only the bad, depending on your experience there and depending on your personality. And I knew that I could mythologize Fredericton in a way, so I kind of wouldn't. I wanted to get things down before I was like, let's gloss over that. And just be like, oh, the walking bridge.
Right. It is so peaceful on a Sunday morning.
The Beaverbrook Library. The Beaverbrook room at the UMB library.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I really love the book, and I love the way you are telling the stories of your travel journeys, you know?
Yeah, I realized, like, my partner not sat me down. It's not like he was like, you're in trouble.
Sat you down.
No, but he mentioned, like, I may not be talking about the book the way he experienced it, where, like, it's not just about moving, it's about trying to make home. Yeah. And it's also about, I had a lot of trouble when I moved to Edmonton. I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, and being undiagnosed in a city space was very different than being undiagnosed in a small, like Fredericton is a much smaller place. Its speed is very different. So I couldn't cope. My coping skills weren't functioning. So that is in the book too. Like, that's why it's one thing then another. Like, 'cause that's kind of how I was, it's not just the move, but it's how I was experiencing the city space as well.
Yeah.
Issue after issue. Well, because, like, I'm interested in maybe talking to you a little bit more about form and how a collection comes together for you. For one thing then another, you know, you've got the east section, the then section, which is the travel in between, and then the west section is your time in Edmonton. And I wondered to hear a little bit more about how a collection takes shape for you, and particularly, like, you know, is it simply, because this is your second one, you've got a third one in the bank that's probably forming up for you. Are you, you know, is it about just like, oh, I've got enough poems, or are you working towards a certain form?
Generally, I'm just writing, and then about 30 pages in, I start to be like, oh, maybe I'm writing about this.
Yeah.
And then I start to see patterns in what the poems I'm just writing. And then, so I found, like, I was looking back at, I had some poems about Fredericton before I left, but I had some poems thinking about Fredericton. But I also had been, like, we didn't have a lot of money in Fredericton at all. Like, when we moved, our joke is we joined the paper towel bracket, because we could buy paper towels. We could buy more than one.
Wow.
Like, we were buying just a green pepper, and now we're like, we can get pepper varietals.
You can get a red pepper.
And that, like, so some of the organization of the first part of that book, it's not all about Fredericton, but it's about the constraint of poverty and the worry. So I find the first part of the book has a different concern than the second part. And the then part I wrote, like, it's a poem that takes place in a U-Haul when we had moved here. I got here April, 2 days before the NDP won. Oh, yeah, 2 days before? Something like that. So I got to write "You're welcome, everyone" on Facebook and Twitter.
Good time to arrive. That was a good time to arrive.
And then May long weekend, we flew to Winnipeg, where my partner's from. We packed up furniture that it was mostly his grandparents' furniture that his mom had been saving for us, and then we drove back through an ice storm. And I was like, welcome to this ice storm on the May long weekend. That was weird. And I don't drive, so he's like Rob's white knuckle driving, and I'm writing a poem. It just was a good division between that and then the concerns I kind of talked about were, like, living in a city, having money to go out. So there's a couple of restaurant poems where like we didn't have that sort of money in Fredericton as much. We attempted, like, we would make choices so we could go out, like like the fact that we have a car and people don't know we have a car ever, because we don't use our car.
Actually, Matthew asked that because he said, "How's Claire getting here?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe Rob's driving her." And he said, "Do they have a car?"
Yeah, it's a secret.
We have a secret, very
breaking news on Let's Get Wet.
We have a secret car. There's secret Santa movies, secret
Those secret Santa movies. Well, I was just trying to think, like, are you just not taking the car out of the garage because of something that happened recently?
It's like a secret movie.
No, but
secret
like
car.
The bumper's broken or something.
No, it's perfectly fine. It's we have arranged our lives so we don't have to use a car that much.
Right. And if it's a part of the way you lived your life for so long, you're used to that. And so...
Like, Fredericton is a city that used to be attached to railway lines, and they ripped up the railway lines and made them all walking paths. So, Fredericton is a city where, especially the downtown core, that does have suburban spread like other cities. But most of the students I knew, we all lived within walking distance of each other. And that was just, so I enjoyed that. I wrote about it. And I wanted to continue that when we moved here, so. But yeah, that's kind of how that collection came together. I think of collections, the way to organize collections is to think of different worries and then put the poems in the different worry piles.
Okay.
So my new collection I'm working on, I kind of have there's two worries going on, so I have three worries going on, so I have different piles.
That's I like that.
Yeah. Interesting. So we were talking about collections and poetry and books that you put out. And so your first collection was about the act of walking. And I noticed a lot of that, and also public transit and just getting around in your second collection too. Can you talk about how walking and travel play into the themes of your poetry, and maybe even how you write it?
Yeah, so Maunder came out of my thesis, and I get lost so easily, and I wanted to not be lost all the time in the new place I lived. So that was the inspiration. And the challenge was getting 60 pages of poetry in a year. 60 poems? Yeah, 60 pages of poetry and then an academic introduction. Done in a year. And that was just grab bag ideas. So I did go on walks. I did just try to be aware. That's one of the reasons I don't have a cell phone now, is I would not have been able to finish if I had been.
Yeah, I hear you.
Because I was just searching for images constantly. And the the way I write poetry generally is I get a line in my head that has a good rhythm, and then very often it'll be when I get up, and if I have a bath and read poetry in the bath, and then there's a rhythm in my head from reading the poetry, but sometimes it's walking to work, because walking builds a rhythm. And I find if your body is doing a rhythm, it's very easy for your words to do a rhythm. And that's why there's a great history of walking poetry, like from the Romantics, Goethe, I think he was a walker. I may be getting him confused with another German. But yeah, there's a big walking history. Frank O'Hara's lunch poems. And it does build a rhythm. Yeah. And that makes it easier to have your writing have attention that I enjoy, like poetry to have in my own work and what I read. I always am talking about like, oh, that has a good engine, like that. And I recently, I was at the Olive reading, and Jordan Abel was reading, and his new piece is amazing. If you get to hear it aloud, hear it aloud.
I believe that I heard that. Didn't he read that in the summer at that event?
He read at the Fiddlehead event.
Yeah, it was so good.
And saying it has an engine is a weird metaphor to use for that piece, because the piece is very land-based and nature-based, and then it's like you want it to have muscle, you want it to have movement, you want it to have attention. And I find if you can build a rhythm in however you need to do it, some people do it by listening to music, some people do it through the act of editing. I think I need that to get me to the end of the poem. You want the poem to be sort of breaking your brain with what it's saying, but also making you go forward at the same time to get to that next line. That's kind of my ideal.
Yeah. But let's talk a bit about
sure,
like what different people are writing, and you are inspired a lot by pop culture, and particularly when we look at your upcoming chapbook with Rahelia's Ghost Press. So we want to know why do you think you're drawn to writing about this pop culture, and what do you think it adds to your work?
We are just bathed in pop culture. Like, it's a part of our landscape. I remember I had some professors who had a lot of trouble in creative writing classes finding a book everyone had read to prove a point about narrative, or to prove a point about proof isn't right, to elaborate on a point about narrative, or to give an example, and or character or whatever. But people had seen TV shows, people had seen movies, and I saw them mourning that we all weren't reading the same books, whereas I was like, I don't know if the canon is something to celebrate in that way. So I mentioned Hannibal Lecter in that one. I love Silence of the Lambs. I don't even consciously, like in the horror collection, like I was purposely writing a horror collection. But I don't always, in that one, it's just like, they reminded me of Hannibal Lecter. That's my reference. That's my world. And that's what I'm taking stuff from. I'm not even thinking about it necessarily of being like, I'm going to make a pop culture reference now. Yeah. For the horror chapbook, that was more conscious. Usually, as I said, I don't sit down and I don't do project books very often, because usually when I try to do a project thing, it's 6 poems, and then I'm like, that's not enough. I can't make a book out of that.
Yeah.
See the mushroom poems from my first chapbook. It's half the chapbook, and that's it. Then I get bored and I have to move on. But for horror, I think horror is important right now. I see, I forget who it was. My medicine is wearing off, so I'm going to have trouble with names. Okay. Yeah. But there was an article in the CBC about Indigenous horror.
Yes.
Alicia Elliott.
Yeah.
And here's my theory. I have two theories. Okay. First theory, if the government, if police, if social structures aren't going to listen to these major problems that are in society and you have nowhere to put them, the narrative of horror with the catharsis built in at the end is a very useful way to bring attention to those issues, but also to survive those issues in a certain way. It's why I was talking with my partner before I came, where I think straight, cis, white men may watch horror differently than other people.
Yeah.
Huh.
That'll play into the poem I'm going to read later, but, like, I read true crime, I look at true crime, listen to true crime podcasts, I read true crime, I read horror, in a way to find tips to survive.
Yeah, I agree. As a woman, 100%.
So, yeah, I just think I'm in my mid-30s now. I'm around the same age as the guys who made Stranger Things. We call it jokingly Stranger Danger in our house, so I have to remember what the title is. Stranger Thing, like, it's in the air because the people who are the creators now are around my age.
Yeah.
And they were grown in the same, like, topsoil, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Very cool.
So that becomes a focus for me, and it allowed me to write what I was angry about, which is a lot of Can Lit, a lot of Me Too, a lot of going through the realization that although I've been lucky not to have certain experiences, I have had experiences that make the world at large a scarier place than it is for some people. Than it is for my partner, even. Like, yeah.
Well, I think what I want to do is take things out of order.
Okay.
You want me to read the horror one now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good tie-in for what
so.
we've just been chatting about, is you could preview your chapbook, Another Final Girl, by reading
Cool.
Places in Which to Be Wary.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this one I created I found a list of 100 best horror films, and I found some others that I added to it. And I basically went on IMDb and looked at all the locations that the films were about to see how many places we're supposed to be scared in.
Okay.
Places in which to be wary. In the predictable Gothic miscellanea of convents, funeral parlors, hospitals, perma-vacancy motels, all the cliches wrapped in scarlet-stained shrouds, at mysterious abandoned carnivals, circus sideshows, caves, coated in the dust of excavation sites, in churches and brothels, in foggy graveyards and dripping dungeons, in large spooky rented houses, in maximum security asylums, in each ominous orphanage. Far-flung and remote, villages quaint and small, say rustic with a rusty chainsaw. Say let me alone with my thoughts while even the grass grows sharp as blades. In wooden churches of abandoned villages, in sleepy New Mexico towns, all cabins in all the woods. In the French countryside, yes, I said all cabins. In Maryland forests, at your widowed aunt's country home. To escape the rat race, but rat teeth continue to grow and must gnaw on something, probably you. In new farmhouses and old farmhouses, never trust a farmhouse. Even in space, at Antarctic research stations, in the backwoods of Texas. In the suburbs, in spotless homes, at your neighbors, in the outskirts of Stockholm. When you close your eyes, it's so easy to be there, so you think, what's the worst that can happen as it's happening? In quaint Washington hamlets, the quainter, the more dangerous. In Midwestern burgs, the suburbs, all of them. In wares so familiar they lure you to surrendering survival. In bathrooms of all kinds, gas stations, in the normal world, on the internet, so many shopping malls, in your very own home. Places you pay extra to pantomime safety. What a scalpel-wielding farce. in mansions, manors, estates, in sorority houses, new gated communities, castles, especially German ones, in the upper-class houses of white in-laws, in greater and lesser cities, in Paris, in Parisian apartments, in New York's Greenwich Village, on every ghost brotherly loving street of Philadelphia, in the Cabrini Green projects, on the Berlin subway, in certain London quarters, strike that, in pretty much all of England. Bodily harm near bodies of water, in Venetian canals, strange Californian seasides, in the Bay Area, waterlogged, a baptism of blood diffusing from flashy red to languid pink, in Bodega Bay, on the Isle of St. Sebastian, at beach resorts, especially on holiday weekends, on oft-ignored islands off the coast of Scotland or Scandinavia. Something to learn, to trust your instincts in places of learning, veterinary schools, at proms, in every single laboratory, at anything that calls itself an institute, at prestigious dance academies, at pre-elementary and high schools, at universities. No matter what your major is, study how to dash down a corridor without slipping on a puddle of your best friend, that the cute boy might just be a killer despite his wavy hair and dimpled smile, or maybe just cruel, gifting a small death for you to carry forever, and maybe this being what horror movies are for, lessons to carry forever. You think running might help, shifting the car to drive and gunning it, but danger lurks while in motion, in every manner of car, train, plane, boat, from town to town, country to country, the whole goddamn earth as it spins and pitches through ever-expanding space.
Wow. There's so much in there. No, I mean that in like a really good way. There's so much in there. Because I kept trying to write lines down without the microphone picking it up. And like a rustic cabin with a rusty chainsaw. I think the line that struck me the most, the suburbs.
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs, and
all of them.
All of them. Yeah, that line, the suburbs, all of them.
The collection opens with a poem about growing up in suburbia and how you cause trouble because what else is there to do?
Yeah, and there's also this there's this hidden unknown danger in the suburbs.
Well,
right?
I think horror relies on the assumption of safety.
Yeah,
and then twisting that, contorting that. I once dated a rich boy, and going to his family's house was stressful from a class perspective.
Oh, yeah.
But knowing the fear, like, it's playing with a fear that's real, like, the suburbs aren't safe for everyone.
Yeah.
Rich places aren't safe for everyone. Yeah.
This is a weird break, but can I introduce a wine break?
Yes.
Wine break!
I mean, why don't we, after that intense poem, which I want to read, like I want to sit and read it on the page.
Yeah.
Because there's so much in there. But
and
yes, we should have a wine break.
Hills Ghost Press
when it comes out.
All of their other checkbooks.
When does it come out?
April, I think. We haven't started editing yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it'll come. But it will come.
Spring is like pretty good.
It's not that far.
No,
okay,
but I just mean like
spring is specific enough.
With most like seasons and books and chapbook, but like you just come out when it comes out. Because I think their new stuff's just coming out in the next week or two, and like normally they're like.
Oh, I'm not worried about it.
No, I just mean like there's not a specific date.
No. My full length came out. Is there another bottle?
Got the trenches. I had a little bit in the bottom of my glass. That's why it looks like I have more. I don't actually.
Sure. Yeah. You can't see this, podcast listeners, but Rand poured all the bottle into her.
I did not.
And then gently topped up.
Yeah.
Her and my glass.
And now we're crying.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's fine.
But yeah,
that
you
was
can
our
read
wine
it.
break.
But
that was our wine break. Rand's wine break.
Yeah.
Which is going to turn into a wine evening for her.
Well, we're gonna have to find out where to buy more of this. OMG.
let's talk about kind of the bigger thing that you're doing with your collection. That you didn't.
Which
want
one?
The one thing.
The
that
new one. The new one.
This is the main thing we are talking about. A lot of things, but this is
Sorry.
the one that we mainly wanted to talk
I'm
about.
not great at staying on topic, guys.
It'll be the picture of the podcast episode cover,
Yes.
so then people know what we're talking about. But so one thing then another looks at like two very different places. New Brunswick, Fredericton. Fredericton, New Brunswick.
I got it.
Yeah, I have not province and Edmonton, Alberta. Despite what the UCP would claim.
I got opinions.
Yeah, I know. And so you even see it on your collection here, where it's the Havest.
It is
Have provinces, which I would agree with too. And so as you mentioned earlier, your collection does deal with poverty and poverty in Fredericton. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the different experiences between these two provinces and what you kind of think government of today should look at.
I've already talked about the pepper bracket.
Yeah.
We went up the paper towel bracket. There is a coping that even if my family was we were survivable, we were comfortable at times. We were mostly comfortable. But that was a lot of stress on my mom to make us comfortable, I will say that. But I come from a working class background. I always joke, everyone's always like, why do you have all these chronic pain things or chronic illnesses? And I'm like, urban poor. My body, it's learned, it's epigenetics, but if you come from a place or a family that has experienced poverty and multi-generational poverty, your coping skills and your way to survive, and you're not buying the big truck, the big house. I don't the assumption that the good times will last. You don't have the assumption the good times will last forever. There's an area around a black hole that has a lot of energy, it's just excess energy. Nothing can form there. Stars cannot form there. It's just energy lives there. Nothing builds there. It just slowly gets sucked into the black hole. And that's what the metaphor I'm thinking about for late stage capitalism. There's such excess in the West. Yeah. And we're not building with it. We're just consuming it the way a black hole does. And granted, I don't know what's on the other side of the black hole. Maybe there's something really cool going on there, and this is a faulty metaphor that I don't have access to knowing it's faulty, but it's my thoughts of moving to Edmonton a little bit. And then I see blowing the bank at an individual level, but I see blowing a bank at a political level too, with the UCP. There's no tax. The funnest thing to say to an Albertan is, I love paying taxes. Yeah. I say it as much as possible. Yes.
Hey, I was a single mom for a long time, struggling to keep a roof over my kids' head, and it was social programs that saved our lives. So I will pay those taxes.
Damn right, I don't want to step over corpses on the way to work.
Yeah.
No. That's my line always.
Yeah.
That's a good line. I like that line. That's is that in the chapter?
No, that's just what I say to people.
You might want to put it in one of them.
Horror film, there has to be a corpse, alright?
Yeah.
But I just mean that's the line about what's going on when we're not paying our taxes. We're walking over corpses.
Yeah. It's true.
I think think about that a lot. Even when they cut my library is the downtown branch, which right now is at a different place because they're building the new one. Which I also thought was weird because I literally have taken every one of my relatives who has visited when the Stanley Milner was open. I took my family there to show them the best library I'd ever been to. And then they have gutted it and built a better one. I'm just I don't understand the tear it down and build it up. Yeah. Maybe better.
Yeah, maybe better is the question we're at with the library right now.
The other thing I don't know, this is how I brag about the library,
which
is a bit complicated now, and I brag about more green space per
Yes.
capita than any city in North America.
Yes.
It's
true.
I used to work in tourism and like in terms of like
Yes.
magazines and stuff, and like we did say that a lot.
Yeah. But it's conversationally learning. It's the same way with poetry. Learning to brag stuff up people don't actually think they like.
Yeah.
So, like, people don't know that Edmonton has some really great stuff. People don't know that poetry has some really great stuff. And not talking about it apologetically, talking about it excitedly.
Yes. Yeah. I read, because Matthew gave me a recommendation for the Morgan Parker book.
That Claire had lent to me.
Which I think so he got the recommendation for you. I got the book now. What's the title of the book? There are more beautiful things than Beyonce.
And her new one is Magical
Need.
Yeah, so
also
amazing
book.
book.
Bookshop.
Oh, I've already got it.
But I read her poems in a high school class that I was giving a workshop to yesterday, and the kids were blown away. And I was like, "This is what poetry is now, and this is what incredible women of color are writing, and you need to be reading this, and let's forget about what we all experienced when I was a kid in high school."
Well, yeah, poetry's taught very poorly.
Yeah.
It's taught to understand this, not experience it.
Right.
And yeah, we were there today. Like, I went and talked to a class. I read some of my work, and I read horror. I read Something Wicked This Way Comes, which I first read when I was 12. I had a newspaper route. And I would read it while delivering newspapers. Very poorly.
Yeah, I was like, how did I deliver newspapers? And I was like, there was no time to read.
It would take me 3 hours to do my route.
But you probably got a couple good poems out of it.
But I read, but I was really bad. We weren't allowed to throw. I definitely threw the papers.
Oh.
And I once threw the paper on someone's garage roof.
See, I had to put the papers in the mailbox. If they didn't go in the mailbox...
We were supposed to put them on the porch.
No, there was
I'm actually jealous of both of you because I was a poor country kid and I never got to have a paper route.
You wanted one?
No,
they were a
wanted
scam.
One.
They were a literal scam.
Yeah.
Because they would send you out to collect money and you're like... Half the time when I phone my mom, like, they're knocking on the door and my mom's like, "Hold on, the dog's working." And I'm like, "Oh, I remember this." But yeah, they're not necessarily a scam. It's just like,
sending a 12-year-old kid to collect your...
It really depends, yeah, because like, we had to collect the money too, and like usually like you would give like a lot, you would make, and like I think they always ended up paying us still too, like based on like what we couldn't collect. And like people would, I lived in a good neighborhood where most people wanted to pay in advance or something, and like this is like Christmas time for a paper boy. The tips that I would get,
I didn't last.
Oh my god! Like, and like people, like not only would I
out on this.
Not only would people like pay you really well as like,
I never
a tip,
made it to Christmas.
There was like a day, and like I would judge the people who didn't have like a card or like baked goods or like chocolate.
Oh my
and, like,
god!
I was just like I was spoiled in the like 2 weeks.
You were like, "Where's
Christmas.
my Christmas cookies?"
Yeah, I would knock on the door.
I am not putting your paper in your mailbox. It's going to be in the wet curb.
Yeah.
So like, I read that while delivering newspapers in October.
Sorry.
She's getting us back on track.
I have a question. I read it, and it was like one of the best reading experiences of my life, because the book takes place the 30th of October and the 31st of October.
Okay.
And like, so it was like I'm stepping on leaves. It's describing like it was just one of the like. Have you guys had really good reading, like a perfect reading experience for a book? I have one other, which was reading To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf on Grand Manan Island, which is off the coast of New Brunswick. And it was fogged in, and literally there was a foghorn going off, and like it was just like the perfect place.
Yeah.
What's your...
I don't know right now. Okay. I have to sit and think.
I always think of like when I read Andre Asimon's like "Call Me by Your Name," and like I read that like on like a summer trip to like BC, and it was just sort of like, because it's all taking place in Italy, and there's lots of like wine and good food, and that was kind of like what that trip was all about.
Oh.
So it felt like kind of like the perfect summer read. So So, yeah, my question that I was going to ask you before you interrupted me on my own podcast.
So much ownership.
I know, right? I want to be like, there's a man talking. How dare you, Claire? Anyways, we, in a mutual respect, have workshop poems together before. And something that I was struck by in the way that our writing differs, and like, you know, something that, you know, I think has come up a couple times tonight is that I tend to put a lot more of the personal and as much of my personal self as I can in a poem. I don't really hold back. I'm a very much like confessional.
This came up once when we were editing. Yeah.
And whereas you've admitted sometimes that you hold back or will change details so that
sometimes I lie.
And sometimes you lie so they don't feel too personal. And so I want to talk
not
to you
so that they don't feel too, so that the poems work.
You know, okay, and like I guess if we can talk a little bit more about why some things either seem like off limits or like why the poem working is more important than an honest poem for you.
Yeah, I feel like for me it's wrapped up in a class-based thing. Sometimes. Like we were talking about the newspaper delivery,
and I'm spoiled.
No. But, like, my reason I didn't want to go ask people for money is you don't do that. Like, there's a story of my nanny who's, like, a very, like, important figure for me. She had 6 kids. My grandfather was great, but... and I agree with him a lot. Like, he would quit jobs if someone would disrespect him. But he had 6 kids. And so my nanny had to hold things together. And as I said, my mom was very good at holding things together. And it becomes, you don't ask for that. In the same way you don't invite people into your business.
Right.
I remember I have a friend who, like in Alberta, when you have a baby, they come to your house and they check if your baby has jaundice.
Yeah.
And I immediately got that straight spine. That means, so they come into your house and they judge you for how you're taking care of your baby. That's how I read it. And I was imagining, in our country, we steal Indigenous kids away from their families a lot. It's a class reading, but there's also a racial dimension. And so there's details it's none of your fucking business. That's my honor. And I will make the poem enjoyable for you. Don't worry about it. You don't necessarily get to have access to me or my family or anything like that. None of your business. I can make things interesting. I'm not willing to put my family up for people's... I've written poems about my dad. I've not been close to my dad. My dad's dead now. So, like, that, I'm allowed to do that. But, like, there's certain things where I'm like, no. It's an itchy prospect of, I'm not a confessional... I love confessional poetry. That's primarily what I read, even.
That's what I'm working on.
But, it's... No, like... No, you don't get that. It's not yours. It's mine.
I totally respect that. But saying that then, what do you hope people would take away from your work then?
Generally, it's that the world is in all the extreme emotions that could appear in a confessional poetry. The world makes that, and and I can make that, and my brain can make that, and I can do that without you, like, this is just a personal thing without me using my family.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want those emotions still, but I generally am doing them through images or through juxtaposition or through, like, a walk can be fucking intense if you think someone's following you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can set up situations. And sometimes I do write confessional poems, but people never notice they are. Because sometimes I'll put them in third person, and sometimes it can be true without having the details of my family.
Yeah,
you know
100%. I mean, even when you read the last poem and we were saying, like, we were struck by the line, suburbs, all of them. I mean, this is not a confessional poem, but there's obviously some deep meaning there, some deep, something has...
And it's a personal poem because I've watched a lot of these movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and I've tried to analyze that. Like, you get access to my brain, you don't necessarily get access to my story or my family's story.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is, it's something I think about because I do enjoy confessional poetry and Canadian awards love confessional poetry too. And that is great because I enjoy it, but there's I've had to think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's still itchy, I feel like. I have to loosen my limbs.
Good answer.
Yeah, super good answer. Well, I think maybe we should ask you to read a final poem for us this evening. What do you think?
Yeah.
Matthew? Yeah.
That sounds good to me.
So this poem, I love this poem so much. And I was actually texting Matthew the poems that I wanted you to read. And I sent him a text like, oh, this poem. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this poem. And then, half an hour later, I was like, no, it has to be this poem.
And we both agreed.
We both agreed. So we would like you to read D2O.
Yeah.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, D2O. It's the chemical name for heavy water.
Okay.
I don't know. This one's, and I'm gonna say this is a pretty confessional fucking poem.
We want the whole story.
Yeah. It's a story that's complicated and then has been made more complicated every time I go back to Fredericton. Leaving people behind. And in this case, I found out the truth of the person afterwards, and it was very painful. It's just painful. Okay. Thanks for bringing it up, guys.
Sorry.
You put it in a book.
Yeah, so basically it's about someone who was a friend, and I left them in a bad state when I moved. This poem appeared in Poetry is Dead. I like to acknowledge the lit mags they were in, because lit mags are important.
Yes.
And you should subscribe to them so people don't yell at them on Twitter for having contest entry fees.
But also, I guess you can probably still buy Poetry is Dead's last issue.
Yeah, Poetry is Dead. They're not the example to give, but yeah, I'm just being difficult. Yeah. And it's about a friend I left when I was a bad state when I moved. D2O. A friend is losing his soul 3 time zones away. I don't even believe in souls, but he's losing something. He lives within a dampness that keeps people sodden and secure, reasonable. Like their innards, what's outside their bodies is mostly water, so they can't forget where they came from. I went to grade school near a Candu nuke plant, and at 12 learned of heavy water. Can't remember anything about it now, just that some water at atomic scale must be easier to carry than others. Where my friend calls home, cars all fall to pieces from salt and rain. And here they keep going, light as empty water skins. Could take off from one side of the river and land with a cloud of rust on the other, their chassis sloughed to bird bone. But my friend feels heavier without his soul, that I can't think of another word for, his not soul. Like some nemesis hated emptiness, so spat on a sad iron and sutured it inside him. Now he's a pulp and paper mill burning down near the dank earth, which is too far away in a country that's too big to be of any help.
I find it interesting, because not knowing what it was about, I had my own take on that.
That's
poem,
cool.
Right?
I love that.
Yeah, which of course poetry is, and because my family's been dealing with a lot of depression and
that's
stuff over the past year, which is also heavy and confessional. I went right to that place.
But that's what the details I had then were that. Whereas I know, like, every time I go back, I find things out and have nightmares about it. And, it's no good.
I think like
We've
even
created
the-
a beautiful poem.
Yeah.
I think even the poem of it kind of references to like what future things could happen because like even
Yeah.
that line of now he's a pulp and paper mill burning down
Yeah.
near the dank earth and like what sort of things that you infect by being that way where you are.
And the arrogance of thinking that I could have helped.
Yeah.
And it is arrogance. Like, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, like, that's not how this shit works. You know what I mean? So I'm getting all sweary because of the wine's kicking in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
That's why I asked you before, like, are you sure you're not Italian? But I get the Irish.
Claire
Totally
Kelly?
get the Irish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's been a real pleasure talking with you tonight.
Thank you
I
guys
think,
for having me. I meant to say that earlier. Thank
Yeah,
you.
wow.
No, this is where we say thank you.
Yes.
We didn't
yes.
really like introduce you at the beginning and let you say hi.
You
or
did the
anything.
longest bio ever.
No, but it just means like there was I'm like, hey Claire.
Yeah,
Claire
it was like,
talking.
hi,
Yeah.
Claire. We didn't do that, so hi, Claire.
So yeah, I guess thank you for talking with us tonight and sharing your poetry and whatever experiences that you shared that you didn't hold off on.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate every little detail and morsel.
We do. And we do want to thank Gurvinder Bhatia again and the Writers Guild of Alberta for being amazing partners and supporters of the podcast.
And yeah, to all of our listeners, thank you and keep up to date on the podcast. Please follow us on Twitter at @lets_lit and subscribe and listen to the podcast at audioboom.com and more places where you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Well, I was going to just remind everybody that Claire's books are Maunder and One Thing Then Another, and they are available at Glass Bookshop. Okay. All right. Well, hey, two beautiful and terrible things.
Yeah, Claire Kelly. Cheers.
Cheers.
I got no more wine.